She had always loved the quiet corners of her home, the kind of corners where light fell softly through dusty windows and everything seemed paused for a moment. But there was one corner that drew her more than any other. There, covered with a thin sheet of white cloth, sat the old piano. Its wood was scratched, faded, and worn from years of neglect, and the keys had yellowed with age. It had been in her family for decades, but no one seemed to care for it anymore. For most people, it was just furniture, a relic that belonged to the past. They never imagined it could speak again. She remembered the first time she saw it. It was tucked away in the living room, against the far wall, overshadowed by a bulky old bookshelf and a faded armchair. The other children in her neighborhood would sometimes peek through the windows and laugh, calling it an ugly old thing. Even the adults in her family would shake their heads and suggest it was time to sell it or get a new one. "It's just a piece of wood and ivory now," they would say, their voices filled with certainty. But she couldn't see it that way. Something about it felt alive to her, something that no one else could feel or understand. She felt a quiet connection with it, as if the piano had been waiting for her. The first few times she tried to play, the sound that came out was awkward and uneven. The keys resisted her fingers and some notes were slightly off. She could feel the eyes of her friends and neighbors on her when she practiced, and many would snicker or comment. "Why do you waste your time on that old thing?" they asked. "Get a modern piano if you want to play seriously." Their words stung, but she didn't let them stop her. Every evening, when the house grew quiet and the shadows stretched long across the floors, she would return to that corner. The old piano seemed to breathe with her presence, responding to her touch in subtle ways. And she felt a growing sense that it held secrets she had yet to discover. Her first lesson wasn't easy. She had no teacher to guide her at home, and music books felt confusing at first. The notes danced on the pages, and she struggled to translate them into fingers moving across keys. But she didn't give up. She would sit there for hours, pressing each key slowly, trying to remember every sound. Her fingers would ache, and sometimes her back would grow sore from leaning too long over the keys. Still, she persisted. She began to learn not just the notes, but the way the piano seemed to want to be played. It was not like the new pianos she had seen in shops. It had its own character, its own temperament. And every time she pressed a key, it seemed to tell her a story. It was not just a musical journey. It was emotional too. Some nights she would press a key and hear a note that seemed to make her heart ache in ways she could not explain. Other nights the music would lift her spirits, bringing a strange warmth to her chest. The old piano seemed to respond to her moods, almost like it understood her. Sometimes she would close her eyes and let her hands move freely across the keys, feeling the vibrations travel through her fingers, her arms, and into her soul. She didn't always know what she was playing, but it felt right. Each note, each chord, was a small conversation between her and the instrument that no one else could hear. Her family watched quietly. They were polite at first, nodding when she played, but their eyes often betrayed impatience. They wanted her to do something practical, something that made sense to them. They didn't understand that for her, the piano was more than just an old piece of furniture. It was a companion, a teacher, and a keeper of memories. Every scratch on its surface, every worn-out key, seemed to tell a story she could feel even if she didn't know the details. And while the world around her seemed to insist that she abandon it, she continued to nurture her growing bond with the instrument. Friends outside the family were not much different. Some teased her, calling the piano outdated, useless, or even embarrassing. "Who even uses pianos like that anymore?" they would ask. Their laughter was sharp, but she learned to ignore it. She began to understand that their opinions were shallow, based only on appearances and trends. The piano had something deeper, something timeless. She realized that others could not see what she saw, could not hear what she heard, and in a strange way, that made her feel a quiet pride. She was the one who could bring life to it again. Her days began to take a rhythm shaped by the piano. School and chores filled the daylight hours, but the evenings were reserved for her secret practice. Sometimes she would start by simply touching the keys, letting her fingers glide over them without forming a melody. Other times she would play old songs she remembered from books or recordings, letting them guide her hands and teach her the ways of harmony. Slowly she started to recognize patterns, understanding which notes could be played together to make the sound she loved. The piano was teaching her patience, perseverance, and the beauty of small progress. There were nights when frustration would creep in. A stubborn key might stick, a note might sound wrong, or a melody refuse to flow. Her fingers would press harder, her brow would furrow, and sometimes she would even feel tears prick at her eyes. But the piano never gave up on her, and slowly the resistance softened. It was as if it wanted her to learn the lessons it had stored in its wood and strings. She began to discover that the instrument's hidden power wasn't just in the music it produced, but in the discipline, patience, and love it required from her. Each mistake became a step forward, each challenge a way to grow closer to unlocking its potential. One rainy afternoon, the sound of the piano seemed to carry differently. She had been playing the same simple melody over and over, just practicing scales, when suddenly the notes took on a new quality. They were deeper, warmer, more alive than they had ever sounded before. She stopped, her hands hovering over the keys, amazed. She tried again, and the sound continued, richer and more resonant. It was the first time she realized that the piano had a voice of its own, one that could only be heard if she played with patience, feeling, and understanding. It was a small revelation, but it filled her with hope and excitement. She felt as though she had touched something extraordinary. Encouraged, she began experimenting more boldly. She would press 2 or 3 keys together, listening to how the sounds mingled, creating harmony and tension. She tried different rhythms, sometimes fast and lively, sometimes slow and thoughtful. Each experiment brought her closer to discovering the piano's hidden character. Slowly, the old instrument was no longer just a relic, it was becoming a partner in creation. She began to feel a sense of wonder each time she approached it, a feeling that this piano, forgotten by the world, was waiting just for her. Even when others doubted or laughed, she never stopped. The piano became her refuge, a place where she could be herself without judgment. She learned to listen not just to the music, but to the instrument itself. She discovered that it had a memory, a history embedded in its wood and strings, and that by touching it gently, she could awaken sounds that had lain dormant for years. Each evening, she felt a quiet thrill as she pressed the keys. Hearing tones that seemed to echo stories from the past, neighbors and friends would sometimes peek through the window, curious about the sounds they could hear faintly from her room. Some would comment skeptically, "Does it even sound good?" Others would shake their heads, muttering about wasting time on an old piano. But she had learned not to care. The music was hers, and the joy she found in coaxing life from the worn keys was beyond their understanding. Every note was a small triumph, a quiet victory over doubt and neglect. She also began to notice changes in herself. The discipline required to practice each day, the patience to wait for progress, and the focus needed to understand the instrument's quirks all shaped her character. She became calmer, more attentive, and more determined. The piano was teaching her lessons beyond music. Lessons about life, perseverance, and the rewards of caring for something that others had abandoned. In a way, the piano and she were growing together, each shaping the other in subtle, profound ways. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and cast long shadows across the floor, she sat at the piano and played a melody she had created herself. The sound was imperfect, but it was full of emotion. She could feel the notes vibrating through the room, carrying a sense of longing, hope, and quiet triumph. For the first time, she realized that the piano was no longer just a piece of the past, it was alive with the present. It responded to her, guided her, and seemed to understand her heart. That night, as she closed the piano and wiped the dust from its surface, she made a quiet promise to herself. No matter what anyone else said, no matter how old or worn the piano appeared, she would continue to nurture it and learn from it. She had discovered something precious, a hidden power within an old relic that others could not see. And deep inside, she felt certain that this was only the beginning of a journey that would change her life in ways she could not yet imagine. Even though she had discovered the quiet magic of the piano, the world outside her room continued to press on her. Friends, neighbors, and even some family members questioned why she spent so much time with an old, dusty instrument that looked like it belonged in a museum rather than a home. They did not understand the connection she felt, and their words often made her doubt herself. But every time she thought of giving up, she would hear a faint echo in her mind, a soft whisper that seemed to come from the piano itself, urging her to continue. It was as if the piano was alive, asking her to keep listening, keep playing, and keep believing. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. She developed a routine that balanced school, chores, and piano practice. Even when her body ached or her mind was tired, she would find the energy to sit at the piano for a while. Sometimes she would play slowly, pressing each key carefully, as if trying to coax the sounds from the instrument. Other times, she would experiment, letting her fingers dance across the keys without thinking, discovering chords and melodies she had never noticed before. Each session brought new discoveries, small victories that filled her heart with quiet joy. Her practice sessions were not always easy. The piano had many quirks. Some keys were stubborn, sticking or producing a slightly off note. The pedals squeaked when pressed, and certain notes seemed to fade too quickly. At first, these challenges frustrated her. She would press harder, tap the keys again and again, and sometimes even sigh in exasperation. But over time, she began to understand that these imperfections were part of the piano's personality. Instead of trying to force it into perfection, she learned to work with it, to respect it, and to find beauty even in the flawed sounds. This patience changed the way she approached not just music, but life itself. She began to set small goals for herself. One day, she would focus on mastering a particular melody. Another day, she would work on blending notes to make them sound smooth and connected. Sometimes she would simply improvise, allowing her feelings to guide her fingers. The piano responded to her mood, creating sounds that matched her emotions. On rainy days, the music could feel soft and melancholic. On sunny afternoons, it could be lively and bright. She realized that she was not just playing the piano. She was communicating with it, forming a bond that grew stronger with every practice session. Her family remained mostly indifferent. They would pass by her room, hearing the faint music, and offer polite compliments at times. "That sounds nice," one might say casually, without really listening. They did not understand the depth of her connection with the instrument, and they did not see the lessons she was learning through it. They wanted her to focus on more practical activities, things that could lead to a visible, measurable success. But she knew that the true value of what she was doing could not be measured in numbers or prizes. It was a quiet, internal growth, something that shaped her character and filled her. With confidence and purpose, her friends outside the family continued to tease her. They would ask why she didn't buy a modern piano, why she wasted time on an old piece of furniture, and why she didn't spend her energy on other hobbies. Their laughter was sharp, and sometimes it hurt more than she could admit. But she had learned to ignore it. She had found a world within the piano that was far richer than any opinion outside. She began to understand that not everyone would see what she saw or hear what she heard. That was fine. What mattered was her own connection, her own discoveries, and the quiet joy that came from awakening the piano's hidden potential. As the months passed, she began to notice subtle changes in the piano. The keys that once felt stiff and unyielding now responded more smoothly. The sounds seemed fuller, richer, and more vibrant. She realized that the piano was responding to her care and attention, just as she was learning to respond to its personality. There was a delicate balance between them, a silent conversation that required patience, trust, and time. She felt proud of the small improvements, knowing that every hour spent cleaning, tuning, and practicing had contributed to this transformation. She also began to experiment with composing her own melodies. Inspired by the piano's hidden voice, she would start with a few notes, letting them guide her to others, slowly building a song. Sometimes the melodies were happy, sometimes sad, sometimes reflective and quiet. Each composition told a story, a reflection of her own feelings and experiences. She would play them repeatedly, adjusting notes and rhythms until they felt complete. Even if no one else heard these compositions, they were meaningful to her. A testament to her growing understanding and creativity, there were nights when she would sit at the piano and play in complete darkness. letting the soft glow of a streetlight filter through the window. She would close her eyes, feeling the keys beneath her fingers, listening intently to every vibration, every resonance. It was in these moments that she felt closest to the piano, as if they were sharing a secret only the two of them could understand. She began to notice that the music had a power beyond sound. It could lift her spirits, soothe her worries, and even make her feel brave in ways that nothing else could. She started to believe that if she could awaken the piano fully, its music might touch others in the same way. Occasionally, she would try to share her music with friends or family. Some would smile politely, others would offer faint praise, and a few would openly doubt her. Their reactions could have discouraged her, but instead, she used them as fuel. She realized that true growth and expression often face skepticism and doubt. The piano had taught her patience and resilience, and now she was learning to carry that lesson into every interaction, every challenge. She was no longer seeking approval. She was seeking mastery and connection. Her curiosity about the piano grew. She began reading old manuals, watching videos, and learning about techniques that could bring out the best in an instrument. She learned to care for the strings, to adjust the pedals, and to maintain the wood. Each small action felt like a conversation with the piano, a way of showing respect and deepening the bond between them. The piano, once a forgotten relic, was slowly becoming an extension of her own creativity and expression. One day, she decided to challenge herself by learning a particularly difficult piece she had admired in a recording. The first attempts were messy. The notes clashed and the rhythm stumbled. Frustration threatened to take over, but she persisted. Breaking the piece into small sections and practicing each part carefully, days turned into weeks as she worked tirelessly, and slowly the melody began to emerge. Each time she played it successfully, she felt a surge of pride and excitement. The piano had helped her understand the value of persistence, of breaking challenges into manageable steps, and of celebrating small victories along the way. She began noticing that the piano also influenced the way she saw the world. She became more patient with people, more attentive to details, and more willing to explore hidden possibilities. The lessons she learned at the keyboard were not limited to music. They seeped into her daily life. She found herself approaching problems with creativity, solving conflicts with thoughtfulness, and finding beauty in ordinary moments. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a teacher, guiding her toward a deeper understanding of herself and her surroundings. As she grew more confident, she began to dream about performing someday, even if only for a small audience. The thought of sharing the piano's voice with others filled her with excitement and nervousness. She imagined the reactions, the quiet moments of connection when someone might listen closely and feel the music the way she did. The idea of awakening the piano's full potential and showing the world its hidden beauty became a driving force, pushing her to practice more diligently and explore new creative directions, even during moments of doubt. She found comfort in the piano. The times when a melody wouldn't come together or a key would stick taught her patience. The moments when others laughed at her choice of instrument reminded her to trust her instincts. And the quiet hours spent alone, discovering hidden harmonies and experimenting with rhythms, gave her a sense of freedom she could not find anywhere else. The piano had become her companion, her mentor, and her outlet, all rolled into one. Through this ongoing journey, she began to understand that true mastery required more than skill. It required heart, attention, and love. The piano responded to her emotions, her dedication, and her care. Each note played with intention seemed to resonate deeper, filling the room with a sound that was rich, alive, and meaningful. The more she gave, the more it returned, teaching her that relationships, whether with people, instruments, or dreams, thrive on patience and commitment. As part 2 of her story unfolded, she realized that she was not just practicing music. She was cultivating resilience, self-belief, and a deep appreciation for the hidden potential in things others might overlook. The old piano, once dismissed as a relic, had become a catalyst for growth, discovery, and quiet triumph. And as she sat in the dim light of her room, fingers gliding over the keys, She felt certain that the journey had only just begun, and that the piano still held many secrets waiting to be discovered. Months of patient practice and quiet determination had begun to transform not only her skills, but the piano itself. The worn keys now responded more willingly, the strings sang with a fuller sound, and the old wood seemed to hum with energy. Every note she played carried a depth that had been missing before, as if the instrument was awakening from a long slumber. She could feel the hidden power within the piano, a power that had been waiting for someone to understand it, someone willing to listen closely and patiently, and now, for the first time, she realized she was that person. Her mornings were filled with routine, school and small chores, but as soon as the house grew quiet, she would return to her sanctuary. She often sat with her hands hovering over the keys, listening to the subtle vibrations in the air. The piano had begun to teach her in new ways. Simple scales no longer felt like exercises. They were lessons in emotion, timing, and intention. Chords that once sounded harsh now resonated with warmth and clarity. She discovered that even the smallest changes in how she pressed a key could produce a vastly different sound, and she began to experiment more freely, letting intuition guide her fingers. One evening, while exploring a new melody she had imagined in her mind, she noticed something remarkable. Certain notes, when played together in a specific rhythm, seemed to awaken a resonance she had never heard before. It was richer, almost as if the piano was responding to her inner feelings, rather than just her fingers. Her heart raced with excitement. She repeated the passage again and again, marveling at the way the sound seemed to bloom and expand. She could feel the music vibrating through the floor, through her chair, and into her very soul. It was a revelation. The piano had a hidden voice. She was beginning to understand how to bring it out. With this new awareness, she began to play with more courage. She tried improvising longer pieces, letting the music flow without strict adherence to any sheet of notes. She discovered that the piano seemed to have its own guidance, almost like it nudged her toward harmonies she would never have thought to combine. She listened carefully, following the subtle cues and the vibrations and the way the instrument seemed to respond. Each session felt like a conversation between her and the piano, a dialogue that went beyond words and notes. Her compositions grew more complex, richer, and emotionally layered. Some were tender and melancholic, reflecting quiet nights of reflection. Others were lively, joyful, and full of movement, capturing the energy of a bright afternoon. She began recording these sessions in her mind, imagining what it would feel like for others to hear them. The idea that her music might someday touch other hearts gave her a sense of purpose she had never felt before. She realized that the piano's hidden power was not just in the notes it could produce, but in the emotions it could convey, and that she had the ability to channel that power into something beautiful. Friends and family began to notice a change in her, though they still did not fully understand it. She walked with more confidence, spoke with more clarity, and seemed calmer even in moments of stress. They could see the time she spent at the piano, the dedication she put into learning and caring for it. And they began to sense that something extraordinary was happening. A few offered faint compliments, but more importantly, they began to respect her commitment. Their skepticism gradually softened, though they remained unsure of what the future might hold for her. And the piano. She herself began to notice changes in her perspective. Challenges that once seemed daunting now felt like opportunities. Mistakes became lessons, obstacles became guides. Every practice session reinforced the understanding that patience, care, and persistence could unlock hidden potential. The piano had taught her that greatness did not come from appearances or immediate results, but from the willingness to invest time, love, and attention into something overlooked or undervalued. One night, she experimented with a melody that had been forming in her mind for weeks. She began slowly, testing each note, listening to the resonance, and adjusting her touch. As she continued, the melody began to flow more naturally. She could feel the piano responding with subtle harmonics, unexpected tones that added richness and depth. It was as though the instrument was alive, actively participating in the creation of the music. She felt a thrill of discovery, a sense that she had tapped into something beyond technique or theory, something instinctive and magical. Encouraged, she pushed herself further. She tried playing pieces she had never attempted before, challenging herself to master difficult passages and intricate rhythms. Each success brought a wave of satisfaction, each failure a new understanding. The piano, in turn, seemed to reveal its secrets more willingly, rewarding her persistence with sounds that were fuller, clearer, and emotionally resonant. She began to feel that she was no longer just a student of music, but a partner with the instrument, capable of unlocking its hidden power and exploring uncharted musical territory as she explored new techniques and melodies. She also began to imagine how her music might reach others. She pictured small gatherings, a few friends listening in a quiet room, or even a performance at a local community event. The thought of sharing the piano's voice with an audience filled her with excitement and nervous energy. She wondered how it would feel to see the reactions of people as they heard notes that carried depth, emotion, and a story beyond words. The idea became a quiet goal, something to work toward with patience, practice, and careful preparation. One afternoon, she decided to play a piece she had composed entirely on her own. The music began softly, each note deliberate and filled with intention. As she continued, the melody swelled, carrying layers of emotion and complexity. She felt herself becoming immersed in the sound, losing track of time, and existing only in the conversation between her and the piano. She played for hours, experimenting with variations, discovering new harmonies, and letting the music express feelings she could not put into words. By the time she stopped, the room was filled with a sense of quiet triumph, and she realized that she had unlocked another layer of the piano's hidden potential. The following days were filled with excitement and reflection. She revisited old melodies, now able to play them with newfound depth and expression. She recorded pieces in her mind, imagining what it would feel like to hear them performed for an audience. Each session reinforced the understanding that the piano's power was not just in its sound, but in the emotional connection it allowed her to explore. She began to see that her dedication and care had awakened something that had been dormant for years, something that could inspire and move others when the time came. Her friends and neighbors began to take notice. Occasionally, someone would hear the music drifting through an open window and stop to listen. Some would comment on the beauty of the sound. Others would shake their heads in disbelief that such richness could come from an old, worn piano. She didn't mind their reactions. She was no longer playing for approval or recognition. The true reward was the connection she had developed with the instrument and the satisfaction of exploring its hidden voice. Yet the awareness that others might someday hear it gave her a sense of purpose and anticipation. In quiet moments, she reflected on how far she had come. The piano had gone from being a dusty relic to a living, responsive partner. Her own skills had grown alongside it, shaped by patience, dedication, and the willingness to embrace imperfection. She understood now that the music was not about showing off or impressing others, but about discovering the potential hidden within herself and the instrument. Each note carried meaning, each chord told a story, and each practice session became a step toward mastery and expression. Sometimes, she would sit back after playing and simply listen. The room would be filled with lingering vibrations, subtle harmonics that seemed to tell their own tales. She realized that the piano had become more than an instrument. It was a teacher, a companion, and a mirror reflecting her own growth. She felt gratitude for the journey so far, for the hours spent in quiet practice, for the patience developed, and for the understanding that greatness could emerge from the overlooked and undervalued. As part 3 of her journey unfolded, she began to see a vision of the future. She imagined a moment when she would play in front of others, sharing the music that had grown from months of careful attention and exploration. She imagined the impact her music could have, the emotions it could awaken, and the inspiration it might bring. The piano's hidden power was no longer a secret to her. She had discovered how to awaken it and was ready to explore the possibilities of what it could achieve. She knew the journey ahead would have challenges, but she also knew that the bond she had formed with the piano and the growth it had inspired in her would guide her through anything that came next. The day came when she finally had an opportunity to play in front of others. A small community event had been announced at a nearby hall, and she had decided to participate. The thought of performing made her nervous and excited at the same time. She knew the piano would be there, old and familiar, and she hoped it would respond as it had during her private sessions. She had spent months preparing, practicing the pieces she had composed and refining her skills. Now, the moment of truth was approaching. She could feel her heart beating faster with anticipation. When she arrived at the hall, she saw the stage set up with chairs, lights, and other instruments. The audience would include neighbors, friends, and a few people from the local community. As she wheeled the old piano onto the stage, some whispers floated through the room. People looked skeptical, pointing out that the piano was old and worn, not the kind of instrument you would expect to see in a performance. A few laughed quietly, and others exchanged doubtful glances. She felt a familiar pang of doubt, but quickly reminded herself that the piano had been her companion through countless hours of practice. It had hidden strength, and she trusted it to shine. She took her seat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. The hall grew quiet as people settled into their seats. The first few notes trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the anticipation of what was about to happen. Then, something remarkable occurred. The piano seemed to respond to her touch with a clarity and richness that filled the entire room. The sound was vibrant and warm, carrying emotions that no one had expected from an old, worn instrument. The audience grew silent, captivated by the music that flowed effortlessly from the keys. She played the pieces she had prepared, one after another, each melody telling a story of patience, struggle, and discovery. The piano seemed to guide her, producing harmonies and tones that felt alive, almost as if it understood the significance of this moment. She could see the faces in the audience change, from skepticism to awe, as they listened closely. Some held their breath, completely absorbed, while others leaned forward, trying to catch every nuance of the sound. The music seemed to move through the room, touching people in ways that words could not express. As she continued, she felt a deep connection with the piano, stronger than ever before. Every note, every chord, seemed to carry the history of her practice and the emotion she had poured into it. The piano responded with a vibrancy and depth that amazed even her. She realized that this performance was not just about showing others her skill. It was about sharing the soul of the piano, the hidden power she had discovered over months of patient effort. The music resonated with the audience, creating a shared experience that was both intimate and expansive. The audience, initially skeptical, was now completely engaged. Whispers of admiration and surprise floated through the room. Doubted her began to see the truth in what she had always known. The piano was not just an old relic, but an instrument with its own voice, waiting for someone to unlock it. The power of the music, combined with the authenticity of her performance, left everyone in awe. They could feel the passion, the patience, and the dedication she had poured into every note. The piano was no longer just a tool. It was a storyteller, and she was its guide. She continued to play, letting her emotions flow freely through the music. Some melodies were soft and reflective, while others were lively and uplifting. The piano responded to her touch with subtle variations in tone, producing sounds that seemed to carry the essence of her journey. The audience could feel the depth of the music, the layers of emotion embedded in each phrase. They realized that what they were witnessing was not just a performance, but the result of months of dedication, resilience, and love for the piano. As the final piece approached, she felt a mixture of exhilaration and calm. She knew that this moment would stay with her forever, a culmination of all the effort and passion she had invested. She played slowly at first, letting the notes resonate, and then allowed the music to build, reaching a crescendo that filled the hall. The sound was powerful, yet delicate, commanding attention while remaining intimate. The audience sat in silence, completely absorbed. As the piano revealed its hidden power in a way no one had expected, when the final note faded, there was a moment of complete silence. Then, the hall erupted into applause. People stood, clapping and cheering, some with tears in their eyes, moved by the beauty and emotion of the performance. Faces that had once doubted her were now filled with respect and admiration. And she smiled, quietly feeling a deep sense of fulfillment and connection. The piano had done more than she had imagined it had spoken, and the audience had listened. After the performance, people approached her to offer compliments and express their amazement. Some apologized for doubting the piano. Others asked questions about how she had learned to play so beautifully. She answered with humility, knowing that the real credit belonged to the instrument as much as to her. She shared that the piano had its own personality, its own voice, and that she had only learned to listen and respond. People were fascinated by the story, realizing that greatness could be hidden in unexpected places, waiting for someone willing to see its potential. The performance marked a turning point. The piano was no longer seen as a relic or an outdated piece of furniture. It had become a symbol of perseverance, dedication, the beauty that could be discovered when one took the time to nurture and understand something forgotten. The experience also changed her. She felt more confident in her abilities, more aware of the depth of her connection to the piano, and more motivated to continue exploring the possibilities of music. She realized that this was only the beginning, and that the piano still held many secrets waiting to be unlocked. In the days that followed, people from the community continued to talk about the performance. Some asked to hear more of her music. Others expressed interest in learning about the piano and how she had developed such a deep connection with it. She welcomed the curiosity, sharing her experiences and encouraging others to explore their own passions, no matter how unconventional they might seem. Piano had become a bridge, connecting her to others through the universal language of music and showing that patience, love, and dedication could reveal hidden beauty in the most unexpected places. She continued to practice every day, knowing that the journey was far from over. The piano still had more to teach, more power to reveal, and more melodies to share. Each session was an opportunity to explore, to discover, and to grow. She felt grateful for the journey so far and excited for what lay ahead. The experience of performing in front of an audience had shown her that the piano's hidden power was real, that it could touch hearts, and that she had the ability to awaken it fully. Her confidence grew not just in her musical abilities, but in her own sense of self. She had learned to trust her instincts, to persevere in the face of doubt, and to find beauty where others saw only neglect. The piano had become a mirror, reflecting her dedication, patience, and creativity. It had shown her that even something overlooked could hold immense potential, and that unlocking that potential required not just skill, but heart, understanding, and love. The hall where she had performed became a memory she cherished, a moment when the piano's hidden power had been revealed to the world. She would often think back to that day, remembering the silence that fell over the audience, the rich sound of the piano filling the room, and the emotions that flowed through every note. It was a reminder that the journey of discovery was ongoing, and that true mastery came not just from talent, but from patience, care, and a willingness to see the extraordinary in the ordinary. As part 4 of her story came to a close, she felt a deep sense of satisfaction and anticipation. She knew that the piano still held mysteries waiting to be discovered, and that her journey with it was far from over. The performance had shown her what was possible when dedication met opportunity, when passion met patience, and when love met understanding. The piano had awakened, and so had she. Ready to explore the next chapter of their shared story together. After the performance, life seemed to shift around her. The old piano, once dismissed and overlooked, had become something more than she could have imagined. It was a symbol of patience, resilience, and hidden potential, and people were beginning to notice. Word of her performance spread quietly at first among neighbors and friends, and then further into the community. People who had once doubted her skill and the piano's worth began to change their opinions. They started asking to hear more, to learn how she had awakened the instrument's hidden voice. The recognition was not what she sought, but it was a reminder that her dedication had truly mattered. She continued to practice every day, exploring new melodies, improvising, and refining her technique. Each day brought new discoveries, and the piano seemed to respond with more depth and richness than ever before. She realized that the journey with the instrument was ongoing. There was always more to learn, more to express, and more beauty to uncover. The piano had become a partner, teaching her not just music but patience, focus, and the quiet power of persistence. Through it, she discovered that mastery was not about perfection, but about understanding and connection. Her confidence grew steadily. She no longer felt nervous when someone questioned her choice of instrument or mocked her dedication. Instead, she embraced the knowledge that she had seen the true potential of something that others had dismissed. She had learned to trust herself, to listen deeply, and to nurture the hidden beauty in her world. The piano had become a teacher in its own right, guiding her through challenges, encouraging her through failures, and celebrating her triumphs in ways that no words could capture, as she shared her music with others. She discovered the power it had to move people. Each time someone listened, they were touched by the depth and emotion carried in every note. Some were surprised that an old, worn instrument could produce such beauty. Others were inspired by her dedication and the story of how she had worked patiently to awaken the piano's hidden voice. She realized that her journey was not only about her growth, but also about inspiring others to see potential where they might.